so that we'll have this for playback. And then I'm going to mute my mic and turn off my video. And as of right now, you guys are in charge.
Okay, give me one. There we go. All right. Well, hey, thanks for joining us. I'm Brandon Lauder with AccuDraft, and I've got Guido Pippa with me, and we'll start out. We're going to talk about preventative maintenance, but before we get rolling on that, we're going to give you just a little history about AccuDraft from Guido. Both of us been at this a long time, and hopefully we can provide some interesting information for you today. So with that, Guido, go ahead and kick us off.
All right. Well, thanks guys for coming and talking paint booths with us for a little bit. Just going to take you through a little bit about who we are, and then Brandon's going to take it back, and we'll go through the preventative maintenance. So I'm going to see if we can. There, I think I can click that. Did you click that, Brandon, or was that me?
I just did.
You did. Oh,
I'll
man.
I'll let you try next time, and you can feel special too.
So we were founded in 1977 by my father Guy. He saw that there was a need for technology in the automotive repair space. Started it with his brother Carlos. There's a nice picture there of them just kind of getting started. My father's the tech at the bottom, getting trained on some car bench equipment, some frame and measuring equipment in Italy, and Carlos is back there in the crowd. So they started out in New Jersey with a couple of body shops. So we're real proud of where we come from and what the genesis and the origin of our company is. They started out just like our customers. Our customers started out opening their own body shop. So these were two immigrant brothers coming to live the American dream, and they opened up a couple of body shops. They opened up with one, started in Patterson, and then they actually expanded into 3 shops, one in Yonkers and one in the Bronx. The name was Pippa Brothers Auto Body. So they went on to look for the best in technology. Owning a couple of body shops like that, they wanted to have the best in technology for the shops, so they actually took a trip to Italy, and they went to all the shows and met with several manufacturers to try to find the best stuff that they could get for their shops, new spray booths, frame and measuring equipment. And, part of that actually, this is what started the whole thing. They actually were approached by these manufacturers to not only outfit their shops with the equipment, but also to sell it, right? So, hey guys, why don't you take this to the States? New high performing paint booths were a kind of a new technology, in the late 70s, early 80s. So they were approached by them they bought a few, but they also came back with a handful of brochures, and half-heartedly they said, yeah, let's whatever, we'll give it a shot, and anybody comes asking, or we can promote these things, we can start selling. So shortly thereafter, they actually started to take on a little bit of traction, and this is a nice an old brochure of Pippa Industries. The equipment side of this took off so strongly that in short order the body shops were closed down, and they were solely in equipment, frame and measuring and paint booths. That's a picture of one of our first paint booths there. That's our Super Clean. It was the 70s, so that was what the colors are all about. So you got to forgive us for that one, but that's an old one that must have been, late 70s right there, early 80s. Eventually the brothers went their separate ways. My father formed Sima of North America Incorporated. We partnered with Sima Mechanica in Italy, and he would put his efforts into taking us into not just automotive, but in other markets, industrial, aerospace. He was more the engineering side and the get it done side of the operation. Carlos would actually go on to open his own company in Texas, and he had great success and would later go on to merge with JBI, which was a big industrial paint booth manufacturer, and that actually formed the present day GFS. That's our after Simon North America was formed. AccuDraft this is the first AccuDraft paint booth that was standardized on blue. Thank God, no more rainbow colors. This is kind of a nice shot of our first AccuDraft. It was actually a brand name. I mean, a model name at first, that actually was really where the whole thing took off. And that model name actually became the more recognized name in the industry. So even to this day, if you see any of our paperwork, everything still says Simon of North America Incorporated. But AccuDraft is really the trade name and the brand that was born out of an original model of paint booth. So today we serve automotive, truck market. We do a lot of government work. We do some industrial and aerospace. There's a nice couple of pictures there of us in our new training center. There's a picture of me with during one of the training sessions. So today, myself, my two sisters are the partners, and we've got a really great team assembled. And we're going into new places kind of every day. But automotive is always kind of at the core of our DNA, and that's really what we focus a lot of attention, if not most of our attention on. Manufacturing, we manufacture in Italy, like always, in Arezzo and in New Jersey. So depending on on what a given product might be, it's either made here, or some of the paneling is made in Italy, and then some of the parts are sourced here. So we've got manufacturing in two places, and depending on what type of system we're engineering, the breakdown can be anything from 50-50 to 75-25. But this allows us to not only supply with some of the greatest equipment, but a lot of people ask me, hey, what about parts? What about availability? If something's broken, because they know that we have roots, Italian roots, and they're like, a body shop owner might be afraid of, oh, hey, do you have special stuff that comes from Italy, or something that's going to be way out? If we have something break, everything, all the parts are American, meaning all of our working parts, our motors, our all of our parts on our equipment are American. And if you even have something that's broken, somebody breaks a panel when you're installing, something comes shipped broken, all of that is manufactured in Italy. Let's say a replacement part, anything that we can make in Italy, we make in New Jersey. So that way, if there ever is any sort of support issue, there isn't a support issue. If there's ever a problem, that comes straight out of Randolph. That wouldn't come, nothing really has to come from over the pond if we really need something in a hurry.
You want me to take over, Guido, or you want to keep going?
Yeah, I think the training center, this is our new training center. Really proud of it. We probably have some more slides that we could show you on it, but this is where we're going to be doing some of our other work, other webinars or videos. It's real nice. We've got a couple of paint booths set up, a nice classroom, and we recently increased our production and expansion into this building on the bottom. It's another 30,000 square feet. So I think after this one, you can take over.
Sure. And with our training center, guys, we're going to work we know it's hard to travel, obviously, right now, but it's always expensive to travel regardless of what's going on. in the country. So we're going to work to use that training center to hopefully create materials that you guys can use in your own shops that would be free or easy for you to get. But then also have training events that shops could come to learn more about not just our equipment, but how to use a paint booth properly or how to increase efficiencies in your shop. So with that, I guess we'll get rolling on preventative maintenance. Talked to Kristen a little while back, and it seemed like this is always one of those areas where there's a lot of questions. No doubt, paint booth maintenance or maintenance in the shop, and most shops is definitely one of those areas where people it probably doesn't get the focus that it deserves. And when talking to our technical service team at AccuDraft, I asked them, hey, how many times do you get a call about a paint booth and it's related to something simple that could have been prevented? And they told me, and they had some data to back this up, that 85% of the tech service calls that they get are related to poor filter maintenance, whether it is something severe that the fan has gone out. If you weren't maintaining the exhaust filters properly and changing them like you should, you're going to have problems with the mechanical system. To auto balance sensors, to light fixtures. Filter maintenance will affect a lot of the different aspects of your paint booth. So just kind of keep that in mind as we go through this. Changing your filters is by far the most important thing that you can do, even though it may seem expensive and may seem like a bit of a pain. It's really important to how long your booth is going to last and how well it's going to perform. So with that, let me hide all you guys' pictures here because I don't need to see y'all. I need to see what I'm talking about. Sorry about that. I'll hit just kind of real quick the different areas you need to look for filters. There's probably more filters in a lot of booths than people realize. We hear all the time that AMU filters, people didn't even know they were there. But obviously you've got ceiling and intake filters. If it's a downdraft booth, they're in the ceiling. But you might have a cross draft booth where they're going to be at one end of the booth. You've got floor and exhaust filters, and those are the two major groups of filters that are going to be changed. But there's also filters in the mechanical unit. So if you got a pressurized spray booth, you're going to have filters in that AMU that need to be changed quite frequently. So this picture here will kind of show like a semi-down booth where the exhaust filter is obviously not going to be in the floor. They're going to be in the back wall of the booth. And AMU filters, this is shown with one of our air makeup units, but most of them are going to have some sort of a pre-filter where the intake duct is coming from outside the building, coming down and in. There's going to be, we use a bag filter for that, but sometimes they'll just even be like an aluminum screen in there. Those need to be checked and cleaned frequently, and I'll get into intervals here in just a moment. But something that a few companies do is we do a post-filtration or a recirc group filtration. So that's when you're in cure mode and you're going to recirculate the air from the cabin. We'll filter that air again just to provide an extra layer of protection. And those filters need to be looked at. Having the mechanicals on top of the booth has become very popular over the last decade or so. And that's really easy to forget because you don't ever see the mechanicals. If you never have a problem, you never go up there to take a look. So if you've got a booth with a space saver type design or a mechanical on the roof, there's going to be filters in there that need to be changed or inspected as well. And those can be kind of a challenge to get to sometimes. But keep in mind they're there and they're really important. I'll hit real quick on a little bit more information about what you should be choosing for filters. For ceiling or intake filters, it's important to look to get filters that are rated at 90% or better at 10 micron. 10 micron is the smallest size that the human eye can see in paint, essentially. So I know sometimes if you've been to paint, different paint companies put their school on, you know how thick clear coat is, and they give you a micron or a millimeter reading for that. So 10 micron, a good way to visualize it would be like if you sand body filler with 80 grit sandpaper, that little sanding dust that comes off is going to be 10 micron. It's really important to install these properly as well. Most of the brands will say air leaving side, or they'll have print on one side. Typically, that is going to be the side that should show inside the booth, but not always. So you want to make sure you inspect the filter or take a look at it. The image here on the left that's going to be green or blue or whatever color you get, that's going to be a tackifier. That should always go to the inside of the booth. So that's also a good way to know that. If you have a downdraft booth or you're buying a ceiling diffusion type media like you see on the right, if you look at that, that's just layers of polyester that get progressively thicker. So it's like a big funnel essentially. So big particles can get caught on the thick on the air entering side, smaller particles caught on the air leaving side. And if you kind of inspect that, usually there's going to be a weave or a mat that's going to be on the inside of the booth that should go to the inside of the booth. So just always make sure you put these in correctly. You'd be surprised how often I've been at a shop and they've complained of dirt in their paint or something like that, and the sealing filters or intake filters are just not installed properly. Also, you want to make sure that any clamping devices that hold the filters in place are definitely solid, and there should be no gaps around where the filters are installed. If it's a panel filter like you see on the left, oftentimes those have a wire that's sewn inside of them, and that wire needs to be kind of snapped in properly. And if it's not, you'd be amazed how much dirty air can leak around the edge of the filters. One thing to kind of watch for is, I'm sorry about that. So you want to change these intake filters should be changed roughly every 1,000 hours of spray time. So in most shops, that's going to be twice a year. If you're a really high production shop, you'd have to look at that because you probably burn past 1,000 hours in 6 months pretty easily. But you always want to just try to change those twice a year or every 1,000 hours. The better quality filter you buy doesn't always mean that they'll last longer either. Some filters are rated at 95% at 10 micron. Well, that will provide a cleaner environment. It could load up a little faster because you're catching more contaminants, if that makes sense. Some booths also will have sealing diffusion pans. So this is a picture of, I believe this is a Garmat booth. So Garmat and some booth manufacturers will use these pans to help balance the airflow inside the booth. And if you've got pans like this, you'll need to keep a closer eye on your filters because you're using less of the surface area of the filter. In this case, it'd be a sealing filter. So you're going to want to look to change those about twice as often. So about every 500 hours. And keep an eye on it. And when you actually change the filter, you'll see that there'll be dirty spots where these openings are. And that's because that's where the bulk of the air is going through that filter. And less of the air is going through the filter that doesn't have these slots above it. So you just have a little less surface area to work with. So you want to check those twice as often. Exhaust filters, you're going to want to look to change those roughly every 50 hours of spray time. And that's a really loose guideline because so much of this is going to depend on how the painter is in the booth. If they've got really good painter mechanics and they don't have a lot of overspray because they're more efficient, you're going to obviously be able to get more life out of your filters. But if they're spraying a lot of parts oftentimes or have poor mechanics, they're going to have a lot more overspray, and these filters are going to load up quickly. So there's really two types of filters that we recommend that you use in your booth, and one on the left would be polyester, on the right would be fiberglass. Oftentimes these will come in lots of different colors. The important thing to note is whether it's polyester, fiberglass, it doesn't necessarily matter what color it is. I could give you guys more information on that if you want, but you want to just make sure that they're going to be 6H compliant, which would be 98% efficient. Usually that's going to be a green or a yellow fiberglass. And then with poly, they're going to be all different colors. They don't really follow any rationale. What you see on the left for a poly filter, though, is called a multi-dimensional poly filter. And if you wanted to use poly in your booth, I'd recommend you look at something that's multi-dimensional. Otherwise, it's going to load up quite quick, and you won't get anywhere near 50 hours of spray time out of that filter. The way these work is the same as a sealing filter. The bigger particles go on the air entering side. In this case, it's just backwards because air is going to leave through these. And the smaller density, the smaller pores that you can see in the filter go towards the exhaust fan. With multi-dimensional poly, the idea is that as it fills up in the center of these little honeycombs, you've still got filtration that allows you to build up at an angle coming out of that honeycomb. So that they do work well, but they are more expensive. Some filters you don't want to use would be, kind of paint arrestor style filters. Some of these will be 6H compliant, but I can tell you most booths run an air velocity that is greater than what they've been tested at, and you'll get a fair amount of bleed through these types of filters. So apologize for picture quality. It's hard to get out and about these days to find good pictures. The one on the left is a styrofoam filter, which should be not very popular anymore, but definitely want to stay away from those. They'll let a fair amount of overspray through to your exhaust fan. And the one on the right is a paint arrestor, which does work. This one has a poly backing. You can kind of see a foam backing to it, but it'd be something I would stay away from and use a poly filter or fiberglass filter. You'd be in much better shape. Air makeup unit filters, that's going to be in the mechanical group that we talked about. There's going to be a lot of different versions of filters here. You'll want to look to change these every 500 hours or so. And you're going to find, depending on where your shop is located, environmental factors will really play into how dirty these filters get. So if you're, I worked with a shop that was right next to a big lumber mill out in Oregon, and they had to change these filters like every month because there was so much sawdust in the air. Here, there's going to be lots of different styles. So on the left here is a bag filter. That's going to be pretty popular. The middle aluminum grate there is going to be popular. Those can be washed, or you could replace those with a panel filter like you see on the very far right. In the middle, there's another bag style filter with a tackifier on it, which you can use, but you don't need to use a tackifier inside the air makeup unit if you don't want to. And then panel filters, which will basically look the same as what some of your intake filters in a booth would look like. The idea of these filters is, A, they will extend the life of your ceiling or intake filters, but B, we want to protect the air makeup unit as much as possible. And when we bring contaminants in from outside, that's going to get on to your direct fire burner or your heat exchanger. It's going to collect in the insulation inside of your air makeup unit if it has insulation. So just definitely something, the cleaner we can keep things, the longer they're going to last. With booth cleaning, poor filter maintenance will lead to a ton of different issues. And I'll try to talk through some of these. And I'm sure you guys, if you've been around a paint booth, you've dealt with a lot of this. So the upper left-hand corner picture there is a dirty exhaust fan. If you use good exhaust filters and you install them properly and you change them like you should never have a fan that ends up looking like this, or an exhaust stack that ends up with a lot of overspray buildup in it. So painters oftentimes, they don't necessarily want to change exhaust filters, or they feel like it is a pain in the butt, and it can be, and it can take some time. But really, as the exhaust fan loads up, it's going to need to be cleaned, and it creates a mechanical issue for you at some point in the future because the bearings are going to go out. What happens oftentimes is overspray builds up on the fan, and then a chunk of it breaks off, and the fan comes out of balance and damages the mechanics of it. But to a painter, why it's important to have your fans clean and in good shape is, over time, the overspray is very abrasive, and it actually wears down the fan, and then it collects on the fan, and it really decreases the efficiency of the fan. So, when something changes a little bit over time, you don't notice it very much, but I can tell you that a 10-year-old booth with poor filter maintenance will not flow anywhere near the air that it did when it was new. And that could have been prevented by changing your filters or not abusing the booth. The next picture over here, where we've got our exhaust filters pulled back from the pit because they want to get one more car out before they change filters, or it's Friday afternoon. That's certainly something that happens in most shops. You want to avoid that because it's just going to end up pushing the problem down the road, and you're going to have a bigger, more expensive issue to take care of in the future. Likewise, when you change filters, you can kind of see this picture here. We've changed filters on one half of the booth and not the other half of the booth. That should only be like an emergency type situation, because that's really going to mess up the balance inside the booth, which is going to cause overspray to stick to the walls, to the light fixtures, can get in the light fixtures. It's going to be just hard on the booth to have an out of balance booth. And that can happen if you don't properly clean and then don't properly change your filters. So this last picture here, you can see on the lower left, you can see the ceiling filters are really dirty, and you look at all the overspray on the walls. Some of that's just how they're spraying or painting, but a lot of that is as well. With dirty filters, you just don't have the airflow that you need to evacuate the overspray. And as you know, it's going to stick and stay somewhere. Along with cleaning, I had a hard time coming up with pictures for this, but if you walk inside your booth, any place that you can see a seam, and I don't care if it's a single skin booth, a dual skin booth, or what brand of booth it is, but anywhere you can see a seam, there should be a bead of latex caulk in that seam so that we can make sure to keep any contaminants out of the booth, but also keep any contaminants from the booth leaking out. The image on the left is a dual skin booth, a very nice booth with an H channel that had dirt trap installed. And I never believed that you needed to caulk dual skin booth channels before until dirt trap came out. And you can see these black lines. It's really hard to see, I'm sure. But there's a sealed H channel there, and you can still see where dirt is leaking into the booth and being caught by dirt trap. So you want to caulk every seam inside of a booth. Extremely important, especially on the ceiling and around the filter grids, but even the wall panels as well and around the door should all be caulked. And you'll probably need to do that every couple of years, depending on how often you power wash. I don't know how many guys on here are still power washing their booths. Certainly, if you've got a booth in bad shape, you're going to have to get it cleaned somehow. But power washing is really labor intensive. It's really not that good for the cabin. With AccuDraft, we're fortunate we've got some pretty high-end materials and use high-end coating, so you could wash away. But a lot of booths, it's going to corrode the cabin. Some booth companies even void the warranty if you power wash the booth out. So you want to check into that if you're buying a new booth. And it's just a shitty job to have to do. Nobody wants to power wash. And we are fortunate in the industry today. There's several products out there that you can use that, along with good maintenance, you should really know. I'm not endorsing any of these products per se, but I'll tell you what I've seen that has worked extremely well would be, like 90 white spray on peelable booth coating is pretty awesome. If you can get a nice clean surface, you can spray, a couple heavy coats of this on. You can apply it several times before peeling it off. And once it's nice and thick, you can peel it off fairly easily. And I know peeling off booth coating is not exciting, but trust me, it's a lot easier than power washing a booth. Along with that, 3M does have a product called Dirt Trap. I apologize for the poor image quality here, guys. It's probably showing up a little fuzzy. But Dirt Trap and products like that are adhesive based coatings that you're gonna put on the wall are pretty awesome. I know that they do add some expense, but once again, if you use Dirt Trap and use it properly, just like 90, you should really not have to power wash your booth again. So if you power wash your booth yourself, it's a cruddy job. If you pay a company to come in and do it, they're going to get a couple $1,000 probably to come in and do a decent job, where that could be prevented by spending a couple $1,000s a year on booth coatings. Always want to make sure that you take care of your light fixtures as well. Yes, you can use lacquer thinner and a razor blade to clean the light fixtures off, but there's some great products out there. I know RBL has one, 3M has one, that you can put over the light fixtures. This particular product I'm showing pictures of here is like a stack of tear-offs you put over the light fixtures, and you just tear them off as they become dirty. It's pretty slick. I notice online there's a lot of questions about what people are using for the floor of the booth, and this has come really a long ways in the last 5 years. Here you can see I'm showing pictures of the pig mat, which is the green, which is a really heavy duty mat, almost carpet-like, that sticks down. 3M makes a Dirt Trap product for the floor of the booth, which is great if you have brand new concrete. A lot of people have used just carpet tiles, and I was kind of skeptical of that at first because I felt like you'd get a lot of carpet fibers in the paint, but the shops that have used carpet and they vacuum it daily really have pretty good luck. And then there's clear options as well. If you are in a really high production shop and you have a hard time spending money, you want to change the flooring often, believe it or not, even like 60-pound roofing tar paper works extremely well. It's just black, so it's an ugly color, but that works really well also. So here again, if we protect the floor, we don't have to power wash it. We spend a little money up front, but we save a lot of the labor and heartache over the years of the booth. Booth lighting. We get a lot of questions about bulb replacement and what to use and really what is safe in a booth. So if you look, anytime you have broken glass, you should fix that as soon as possible. I think the likelihood of you having a problem is small, but fluorescent lights, run kind of low voltage, high wattage, and you could have an issue if you had a light fixture filled with overspray from broken glass. So you're going to want to make sure that you definitely take care of that. Also, most modern booths are going to have an interlocking safety switch on the glass itself. If you notice that half of your lights in your booth or a couple of the lights are not working, that'd be the first thing that I would look at, is make sure that one of the light panels isn't loose and that this interlocking safety switch here is, that they're all making contact. Sometimes the portion that's on the glass are just glued on. Sometimes from years of use and bake cycles, those can come loose and fall off. So if you've noticed that several of your light fixtures aren't working at one time, that's what I would check. Typically, most manufacturers have half of the lights running on one circuit, the other half of the lights running on another. So if like half your paint booth lights don't work, that would be the first thing that I would look at. Selecting your bulbs. Maybe you've got a brand new booth and you've liked the bulbs that are in there, and you can certainly just reorder the bulb color that was in there. But if you've got a mix match of different colors in your booth, like a lot of them that I see, wanted to give you guys just a little information on how to select the right bulb. Most booths are going to have a fluorescent fixtures in them. And what you're going to want to try to find is a bulb that's as close to 6500 K as possible. K meaning Kelvin, and that is basically the color of the bulb. So 1000 K is going to be really orange or yellow. Oftentimes, like if you buy lights for your office, a lot of people like the warm light, and they're going to be like, around 3000 K. In the paint booth, though, you're going to want something that's going to be close to daylight, right? So that we shouldn't be matching colors in the booth, but it would be closer to what outside looks like for the painter, and that's going to be 6500 K. And along with that, you're going to want to look for a high CRI number, and this is the difference in price of bulbs. Typically, is going to be the higher the CRI, the more expensive the bulb is going to be. And what CRI stands for is just color rendering index. And that's a percent of efficiency in that bulb. So a 6500 K bulb with like a 92 CRI would be a great bulb because it's 92% accurate to 6500 Kelvin. If you find a 6500 K bulb on Amazon and it's a 70 CRI, just keep in mind, it's really not 6500 K. Only 70% of the light that comes from it is. The other thing is you want to look for the right wattage, which should be pretty easy today, but a 4-foot fixture should be like 32 watts as a T8. But if you want to upgrade to LED, which now is a great time to do it. I think the pricing on LED upgrades and bulbs has come down dramatically over the last several years. In a lot of booths, depending on the manufacturer, it's really quite easy to do, actually. There's direct wire options. So if you had a bunch of ballasts that were out in your booth, you can get 120 volt tubes that will go in that are LED, that have their own transformer inside them. You can also oftentimes run off the ballast or get a ballast for LED tubes, but a lot of the booth companies, depending on what's in there for a ballast, you can just get a LED replacement tube that will run off the ballast that's in there. So it's literally as easy as changing the bulb. But one thing you're going to want to look for is you're always going to want to have a diffuser on LED tube lights that you buy. Oftentimes there's less expensive options out there, but you can actually see the little LEDs on their own. And when you get that into a booth, it's really going to be hard for the painter to see because you're going to have all these little pinpoints of light versus having nice cast light like they're used to with a fluorescent tube. So if it's out in the shop, it doesn't matter as much. You can see the LEDs, but if it's in the booth, you definitely want to have a diffuser coating over top of the LEDs. Booth balancing. Hey, Kristen, I'm not sure. Do you stop for questions at any time? Or you want me to keep rolling, or what do we typically do?
Well, keep rolling. If somebody puts something in the chat box or raises their hand, we'll stop you.
All right, very good. Booth balancing. We'll spend just a little time on this because it is an important maintenance item. There's several different balancing tools, and the newer the booth, the seemingly more complicated it would be. But that's really not the case. This slide here is just going to kind of show you some of the different stuff that you're going to see on a booth. So you might have an incline manometer, like the lower left-hand corner, where it's just some red dye that's going to rise up. Kind of looks like an old thermometer. There's going to be a magnehelic gauge possibly, or a photohelic gauge, depending on the type of booth. And then also newer booths now, we don't use any of that mechanical technology. We use oftentimes what's called a transducer, which is the little blue box in the upper right there. And what that does is it just reads the booth pressure, then gives us a voltage signal that we can take to our control panel and display what the pressure is digitally for you. All of these items do need maintenance though. Some of the stuff that, the shop would be able to do the maintenance on their own. Some of it you might want to have a technician come and do because they would rebalance it. The mechanical stuff along the bottom, the incline manometer, magnehelic, photohelic, those all have basically an oil in them, and that's how they're going to read the pressure, is how the oil moves up and down. That oil can leak out and dehydrate over time, so it's something that will need to be filled. Usually the incline manometers and sometimes the magnehelic, it'll just have a little fill port and say fill to here, pretty easy.
The
But on a,
tubes. Sorry, Brandon.
go ahead.
The tubes too, right? Like what's the thing you see happen all the time is the damn tube this thing's reading from is clogged up with with either overspray, depending on where it's taking the sample from, overspray or when someone does a booth coating, right?
Yeah, that's a great point, Guido. So usually have like a little plug inside the booth where you can see this thing is going to be reading from, and definitely make sure that is open and not clogged. And if it is clogged, never blow compressed air through it. That will definitely ruin it. So we're going to read things in like 1/10 of an inch of water column, and to put that in perspective, that's like 0.003 of a psi. So it's really very minute readings that we're reading here.
Yeah, locating that tube. Also, most people, nobody knows where it is, like until there's a problem. So, there is a tube somewhere in your booth that is telling these things where the pressure's at. So that's the biggest thing. Like 90 is awesome, but it's not good inside of tubes. Inside the pressure transducer tube. I think we got a couple of questions actually. Brandon, you see that?
Let me expand this. Go ahead, read them to me, Guido.
Chat. I got okay. Billy Bird asked, where would I order booth glass replacements?
Booth glass replacement, depending on what you have, you can go back to the manufacturer, but honestly, like you could just go to your local glass store and you could order glass from them. Guido, do you know the rating off the top of your head? I can't think of the ANSI rating off the top of my head.
The glass, I don't know. It tempered. It's got to be tempered glass, or it's got to be wire reinforced glass like ours, right? So one or the other. We can get that information out, but tempered is the big old tempered or wire frame. What they don't want is just a shatter to possibly injure somebody, right? So the tempered breaks up into a tiny bunch of little pieces if it ever breaks. And the wire, the wire glass holds everything together and doesn't let anybody get hurt by the broken glass. So off the bat, that's what I could give you. I don't know the actual rating or anything.
Yeah, I can email Kristen the rating. I know I have it. I just don't have it on the top of my head. I got the chat open now, Guido. So Dave Matthews asked, what's the proper setting for an old style magnehelic? If you have a magnehelic on your booth, I'm going to say it's most likely you have a negative pressure booth. I'm going to get into that in just 1 second. Explain that to you here in just one moment. There's a couple of tools that you can get as well to kind of help balance the booth if you would like. Some of these are expensive, some of them are not expensive. You can get ammeter, which is basically going to read air velocity. Just keep in mind that doesn't read volume of air, it's just reading how fast the air is going, which is really what you need to know for what you're doing as a shop owner. You can get these tools from Grainger. You can get them a lot of different places. Some are inexpensive. You can get ones that go on your smartphone that will work fairly decent for under $100. But just some smoke sticks even would be good to have to put smoke in the booth, just to understand what's going on with the different ways that the booth is loaded. Another really important aspect of balancing the booth is going to be, especially if you have a downdraft booth, is going to be diffusion pan. So the picture on the upper right here is going to be where we use diffusion pans in the ceiling to balance a booth, which is not as common, but certainly still something that happens. If you take those pans out, or the pans under the grates, which is going to be the two lower pitchers, if you take those out and you feel like they're where they were when the booth was installed, and if the technician did a good job setting the booth up, you'll want to put them back exactly where they were. If you don't know where they need to go, then you're going to need to use an anemometer or smoke sticks to kind of move around to get these where they need to go. But essentially, controlling the air direction is going to be just as important as the pressure that we have the booth running at, because we want to have even air distribution throughout the booth. What we do at AccuDraft is the lower right-hand picture here, you can see some square openings. I didn't have a good picture of this, and I apologize, but we have what we call even flow exhaust pans, which essentially can be adjusted to the booth. So if you have no pans in there today, or you've got pans that are not properly adjusted, ours are adjustable. Other companies have just got little round cutouts or holes in them. And what you want to do is, wherever the air makeup unit is, you want to have the pans closest to the air makeup unit tunnel that's providing the exhaust air to the air makeup unit. You want to have those closed off more than you do the farthest from the air makeup unit pan. So it'll be, maybe only 30% of the air will be going through the pit by the air makeup unit, and you want to have 90% or 100% open at the opposite end of that pit. And if anybody's really interested in that, I can give you, more information, or you can send me pictures and I can kind of tell you how you'd want to look to get things set up in your booth on a case-by-case basis. And then back to kind of air volume balancing, there's really three ways that you can adjust the pressure in your booth. Three mechanical ways that you'll do it. One is a variable frequency drive, which a fair number of booths have, not all booths. And if you don't have a VFD, the other way that you can adjust the airspeed is going to be on the sheave, which is on the motor, oftentimes on the exhaust fan. There'll be, instead of just a regular pulley, there's going to be a sheave that has some set screws, and you can turn that sheave in or out. And what that does is it will make the belt ride lower in the pulley portion or higher in the pulley portion. And that works like a 10-speed bike, essentially. As you adjust that, the fan's going to run faster or slower, depending on whether you run the belt in or out. Obviously, the faster you run the fan, the more airflow you're going to have. A lot of older booths too will have a mechanical or just like a hand adjust inline damper. This isn't a great picture. It's just all that I could find to kind of to show you guys. But if you look in your intake and or exhaust duct, oftentimes there's a handheld damper or a hand adjust damper in there, and you can open that or shut that to help get your booth balance where it needs to be. A VFD is kind of the best way to do this. And, even if you've got an older booth, you can have an electrician come put a variable frequency drive on the exhaust motor for you. And then you can just electronically adjust the speed of that. So what a VFD is, it's an accelerator and a brake pedal for an electric motor. And in North America, we use 60 hertz power. Everybody's probably heard that. What that means is that the power is alternating between positive and negative 60 times a second. And when it does that, it's 60 times a second. That's 100% power. And on most electric motors, that's 3,600 RPM. What we can do is we can adjust the megahertz, the MHZ. We can adjust that down. So if we adjust down to like 30 hertz, 30 megahertz, we'd be running 1,800 RPM. And using that, you can adjust the airflow going through the booth or adjust the balance. So, if you're looking at newer booths, you always want to make sure that you're getting something with a VFD. If you've got an older booth, this is really not that big of a deal to add on to your booth. There's really two different types of booths out there. There's going to be pressurized booths and non-pressurized booths. If it's a non-pressurized booth, you only have that exhaust fan to do the balance with. And if it's a pressurized booth, it's most likely going to have an air makeup unit and a burner and a heater. Then we can pressurize the booth using either the intake or the exhaust. But typically, we're still gonna run on the exhaust side to get the booth pressure correctly. Why booth pressure is important is if it's too positive. So if you've got a positive pressure booth, if you've got too much positive pressure, the spray zone is going to be compromised, the air is going to be compromised, and we're really going to have extra contaminants because we're pushing too much air into the booth. We can't exhaust it all out. So that means air is going to hit the concrete, going to bounce off the walls kind of funny and stir up a bunch of dust. And if we run a negative pressure booth or a positive pressure booth too negative, the inside of the booth is going to be compromised because we're going to suck contaminants from outside of the booth into the booth that don't go through filtration. And when we have the booth pressure properly set, we're not going to have those negative contaminants coming in, and the airflow is going to flow in and out as it should. And in this, minor changes make a big, big difference. So with a positive pressure booth, you're going to want to set the pressure in inches of water column to 0.05 to 0.1 inches of water column. And that could be done on the photohelic gauge, or on your booth control panel would be where you would read positive pressure. And if you've got a negative pressure booth, then you're going to use that incline manometer or a magnehelic, and you're going to want to set anywhere from 0 to 0.1 inches of water column pressure negative on that type of booth. With a negative pressure booth, the closer to 0 you can be, the better performance you'll get out of it. However, at 0, you might have issues where you get a little bit more paint smell coming out of the booth because it's really very, very neutral. So you're going to have to be somewhere between 0 and 0.1, but that's where you want to be. If you get above 0.1, the filters will have a hard time stopping contaminants, and then around the door seals and all of that, I think you'll have a harder time keeping particulates out. And on a negative pressure booth, to adjust the pressure, we're going to be using that pulley or an inline damper. And then once again, on the positive pressure booth, we want to set 0.05 to 1/10 of an inch water column to the positive. And why we want to run it positive is because that way we're pushing a little bit of air out of the booth, and we don't allow for any contaminants to kind of get into the booth as long as the doors are shut. Oftentimes, newer booths, or I shouldn't even say newer booths anymore. It's been around for quite a while. We've had it for a long, long time. A lot of times booths will have an auto balance feature. And what auto balance does is it's going to use a photohelic gauge or a pressure transducer to read what the booth pressure is, and it's just going to automatically adjust the variable frequency drive or a pneumatic cylinder to keep the booth pressure where you set it while you're spraying, and as the filters load up, which is an awesome feature. But it also kind of because if somebody's always sprayed in a booth with auto balance and you've had good filter changing practices, you've probably never had any issues with it, and the painter just thinks, man, this booth works great, it's awesome, the balance never changes, always good. But it does have limits to the range. That variable frequency drive has got a limit to how fast it can spin the motor. We really can't go much past 100%. So as the exhaust filters load, the variable frequency drive is going to automatically try to spin the motor faster and faster to keep up, and at some point that range is going to run out. So oftentimes on your booth, if you're getting error codes that are related to pressure, it's probably because your filters need to be changed, or something has gone wrong there from not changing the filters in the auto balance programming. Also, if you notice that the door is below open or suck shut a lot, and with a booth with auto balance, it's going to be something needs to be adjusted because the filters have not been changed as they should. And a lot of times when you let auto balance in multiple different booth brands, this isn't AccuDraft specific, you let it go past its range limitations. When you change filters, you'll have a hard time for the first several booth cycles to get the auto balance needs to relearn where the booth pressure is. It'll take a little bit for that to happen. So there's some different tips and tricks on our brands, but also we know some for other brands. So if you're having auto balance issues, you can reach out. We can give you some ideas. Otherwise, the best thing there is to get a booth technician out to give you a hand.
We have another question here from Matthew Harris saying that his pressure was set at 0.04 for a Titan that he has. Should he change to 0.05 or 0.1 or 0.05 to 0.1? I would say you can go to 0.05 if it's been working for you. 0.04 is good. Keeping it slightly positive, is really what you're looking to do. So you can certainly move it to 0.05 and feel it out. What we're trying to set with the 0.05 to 0.01 is kind of the lower and upper limits, right? 0.04 is still, it's not a bad thing to be below 0.05. Isn't that what you would say, Brandon? I mean, if it's working for you and it's drafting right, you're in a good spot.
Yeah, for sure. And I think on this, because you've got an AccuDraft Titan, I guess we know a little bit more. I can tell you a little bit more about that booth. That booth has a lot more airflow, CFM going through it than what most booths. I tried to kind of tailor this to be like for the average booth or what most shops would have. That Titan has substantially more volume of air going through it. So you can probably run a little less pressure and really have similar results. I don't know if that makes sense or not, but you've got like a Duramax diesel versus a gas engine. You just got a lot more air, a lot more power, a lot more going on there than what most people have in their spray booths. So you can get by with a little bit less. 0.04 is perfectly fine. I would say I'd probably not run it really any lower than that, but if it's working for you and you're happy, great. If you feel like you've noticed that that's changed and you've had some dirt issues because of that, you might want to bump it up just a little bit, but I wouldn't change it too much if that's working for you.
Right. I mean, if you want to tweak it or test it, or, just, hey, while you're spraying, that's nothing more than just a tap on the SP button, and you just click that up arrow, give it a shot. If it acts a little better for you, great. And that can also depend a little bit on filter condition, but that's a touch of a button. So you can just hit that SP, hit the up arrow, and see if life looks a little bit better at 0.05. You can play with it. Just don't go anywhere really out of that range. That's where you'll have problems, right? North of 0.1. That's that's a lot. So I think you can just kind of play with it at your leisure.
Yeah, and you'll hear the booth start to whistle, like any brand of booth. If you've got decent door seals, you can kind of adjust up. Don't want to go past 0.1, but if you feel like you want to try to keep a little bit more out of the booth, you can adjust up until you hear a little bit of a whistle start, and then back down 1/10 of an inch would be kind of how I would do it if I was on site with you.
Hey guys, I think there's a couple of questions here that I may only be able to see.
Okay.
One of them is, do you have recommendations for airflow around a vehicle? And I'm going to assume that's like a pattern. Maybe that's what that question's asking.
Sure. Well, I think oftentimes people want to know how much airspeed do I want to have around the vehicle. And what I always say is a good rule of thumb is, I always ask the question first, not to belabor this. Do you paint everything on? Do you paint as much on the vehicle as possible, or do you paint as much off the vehicle as possible? Because if you're in a shop and you're trying to paint more things off the vehicle and you don't have a vehicle in the booth oftentimes, and you've just got a lot of parts racks with parts set up, airspeed is always going to be way slower because you're not taking up as much volume inside the booth, so the air can't possibly go faster. Usually you want really good balanced air. If you had a well-loaded booth with a vehicle in it, and you have an anemometer and you have less than, say, 60 feet per minute or something like that, then I'd start getting alarmed a little bit. Like that would be a little bit low. So something north of 60 feet per minute would be great. Up to about 125 feet per minute would be kind of a max that I would be looking for. But more importantly, I'd want that really balanced the length of the booth. Even if you only had 40 or 50 feet per minute, as long as it was balanced the length of the booth, I would be fairly happy with that. The faster the air goes, and this is specifically in a downdraft booth, but it does kind of work in all models of booths or all different types of booths. The faster the air goes, the stronger the boundary air would be, which is where, as the air contacts the surface of the vehicle or whatever you're painting, the air from the booth hits that, and it has to accelerate because there's something in its way. And as it accelerates, it creates an area of high pressure right on the surface of the vehicle, high pressure air. And what that does is that's what we call boundary air. And if you have some lint or something light that comes off the painter, that boundary air will have enough positive pressure to it, enough high pressure to it that lint can't get through it. And that's why airspeed is important. You have another question, Kristen?
Yep. The second one in here is, does the shop still need to keep filter certification on file for 6H?
You know what? I have not looked into that in probably a year, but I'm going to say I have not heard that they don't. So I'm going to say that's yes. But I would approach it a little different. If I had a shop, I would just want to keep track of it regardless, because I'd want to know when those filters were changed so that you could know, hey, I'm changing these every 50 hours or whatever on the exhaust filters. That only counts for exhaust filters. I'll clarify that. And it's super easy to make in Excel or something, just make a weekly change log that the painter puts their initials on and maybe puts the part number or whatever filter they put in it. But I'd want to have that regardless if it's required or not, because you want to make sure that those exhaust filters are probably the most important filter to change in the booth. And
Yeah,
the good news is they're cheap. Like, I mean, you should be changing exhaust filters in a booth, in a single row downdraft booth should be 30 to 50 bucks a week. It's not that big a deal.
yeah, one of the things that we do and I'll just echo it and give it back to you guys, but when we do audits, that's one of the things we look for is on the side of the paint booth, where's your maintenance schedule, and who's in charge of that? Maybe it's your painter, maybe it's somebody else in the detail department or whatever, but print the log and have it there and follow it. Cause you're right. It's not that expensive and it makes a huge difference in overall quality and flow. So,
well, if you had a trucking company, you would have a maintenance checklist for your truck, and why not have that for your booth? Man, I know we're running out of time, Kristen. I don't know. We have a hard stop in a couple minutes. What do we have left?
nah, keep going. All right. We've had some go an hour and 20, just,
Okay.
when the topic's good, it's good.
On the outside of the booth, here's just kind of a picture that I took when I was in the shop. They were bitching about, they were complaining about, dirt in their paint and everything else. They had a bunch of issues, but one of the issues they had is that the booth looked like this all the way around it. And just keep in mind, whatever's outside the booth is coming into the booth at some point, whether it's you're doing body work right outside the front doors of the booth, or it's clutter and dust around the booth like this. So the cleaner you can keep that area, I guarantee it will translate into cleaner paint jobs. So, another thing that I always preach is when you're loading the booth, always have the booth running. So turn the booth on before you open the doors in the booth. That way, at least we have the filtration system going so that dust and things like that get inside the booth. We can at least mitigate it, but keep stuff clean around the outside of the booth. Booth doors and seals are another area that are really important, and they're not very expensive. Here you can kind of see, if you start tracking, overspray tracking on a pressurized booth coming out like this, the door seals are probably getting worn, they're getting brittle, or the doors need to be adjusted. On the flip side of that, if you've got a negative booth, so you don't have an air makeup unit, when you start seeing this on the inside of the doors, you've got dirt and everything else leaking around the door seals. Door seals are pretty easy to get. There's really two different types. There's a adhesive seal that's just going to look like a D or a flat deal. Those just literally stick on. You can scrape them off with a scraper or razor blade and stick new door seals on. Usually they're maybe a couple dollars a foot. And then, your more higher end booths are going to use kind of a mechanical seal like the one on the upper right. And that you might have to drill out some little pop rivets, things like that. These seals should last much longer. But really, if your doors are sagging or not adjusted properly, seals are going to wear out pretty quick. And they are really important. And for a couple $100, you can put new seals on a door. Transversely on the bottom of the door, if you don't have a positive seal, you're going to have a wiper seal. Really important that you replace those often if you don't have a threshold, because a lot of debris will come in underneath the doors on these wiper seals. That's something you'd probably replace every couple of years, even. They'll wear out that fast. You can get brushes to go down there. It's not as good as a seal, but it doesn't wear out. So that's an option for you as well. So you get door threshold brushes instead of seals. It's important to look at your door hardware. What we use is a rebuildable hinge. We have a super heavy duty hinge. We've got steel frame on both sides that this hinge mounts to. So once it's adjusted, it should stay in adjustment for a long period of time. At some point, you'll have to replace these little nylon door bushings, which basically work just like an old door bushing set would on a car. Other companies, sometimes there's a grease zerk on there. You'd want to definitely make sure that you grease the door seals or the door hinge if it has that option. Typically you can use like a food grade grease or something like that would be paint shop safe. That's what I would look for. And then adjustable door catches. Most newer booths, and I say newer, in the last 10 years, are going to have an adjustable latch like this. You want to make sure that that's in good working order. And oftentimes if the door is blowing open really easy, you can adjust a little screw on the back of that and add a little bit of pressure to that so that the door will stay shut for you. One thing it's important to note that this does need to be adjusted in and out correctly. Otherwise, this little bushing that you can kind of see in that picture in the upper right, that little white bushing, will wear out prematurely against the latch if you've got the door hinge in too far. So that'd be something to look for as well. A lot of companies use a chrome roller there, and if you see that the chrome's coming off that roller, the door, that catch is just adjusted in too far and needs to be adjusted outwards a little bit so it's a little bit less engaged. Then there's just a fair amount of mechanical items that you should be checking. You know, I'd say every 500 to 1,000 hours. The biggest thing probably be if your booth has belts, you'd want to check those frequently. Belts are pretty easy to replace. They're pretty inexpensive, and definitely something if it breaks causes issues. But usually what happens is the belt starts slipping a little bit over time, and then the booth performance goes down. So we create more overspray inside the booth, and then that just perpetuates our cleanliness issues. You know, some booths, you know, like there was a gentleman that had a Titan. He might very well have a belt drive air makeup unit, and we use a pillow block with a greaser. So you want to make sure that you grease those. You know, every 500 hours would be awesome if we got grease that often. These bearings, once again, just kind of a lithium or a food grade grease would be great for that. I've never had in my experience a time where somebody used a grease and then that translated into fish eyes. As soon as I say that though, somebody will be like, hey, I use this grease and now I have fish eyes. So always just kind of look for a food safe grease is what I would recommend. Looks like we had a question come in here.
Yeah, there's one from Billy.
Oh, yep.
A generic punch list.
Yeah, you know what we do, and I can get that out to everybody. Kristen, is it the easiest just to share it with you?
Yeah, if you'll send that to me, what I'll do is drop it in a Google Drive and then lay that link into the replay video. So if there's any other documents you want to share as well, I can lay those into the replay, where people can just click and download them from the YouTube channel.
Okay, perfect. We'll do that. Awesome. We get a lot of questions. This isn't necessarily maintenance, but we get a lot of questions around summer winter switch, or it could be burner on off switch. Just keep in mind if that's usually there's 3 settings on, you know, most booths with like you know, like the gentleman with our AccuDraft Titan, there's on or off and auto. You know, some booths just have on off, but all that does is turns the burner on or off, typically for spray mode. And if you leave that on, your booth is always going to get warm. The burner is going to kind of run on low fire oftentimes, especially if it's a direct fired burner. And that's why when it's 70 degrees out and you have the burner on and it's 85 in the booth and the painter's complaining, that's the first thing that I would look at is where the summer winter switch or the burner on off switch is set. But keep in mind, if you're spraying water base and you've got a direct fired burner on your booth, it's actually really good for flashing water base to let that burner run. So like what we do in flash mode is we give you a different temperature that you could set the booth to. So you could spray with the burner off and then you could light the burner for flash mode essentially and have slight temperature rise to reduce the humidity in the cabin slightly. Just real quick, some best practices is, yeah, you know, create and follow a maintenance checklist. So I'll kind of get a maintenance checklist mock-up made and send over to Kristen so she can share it with everybody. Always keep the booth doors closed. Don't leave them open. I know sometimes you paint something at the end of the day and you just want to shut the booth off and then leave the doors open overnight. I would recommend against that because it allows for a lot of dust to get in there. You know, leave the booth running as much as possible. You know, when you start the booth in the morning, or when you start the booth for the first time after it's been shut off, keep in mind it takes 5 to 10 minutes at least to purify the air inside the booth. So even though you feel like the booth is on and we should be good to go, it's going to take 5 to 10 minutes of runtime for all the contaminants to be evacuated out of that booth that are in there from starting the booth or opening the doors. And a really good trick is just to use I'm sure you all have like a sun gun or other bright light that you're using for color matching. If you shut the lights off in the booth and look through the window of the booth with that gun, it'll shoot like a beam of light and you can see particulates in it pretty good. So you can use that to know that the booth is clean and ready to be used. This is where it's nice to have a booth with economy mode. You know, we offer an economy mode, which allows you to leave the booth run all the time. And it just throttles the booth way down and uses very little energy at all to keep the booth running, to keep it clean. If you have recirculation, use the cure bake mode as often as possible when you're drying something. So that's where, at the end of the day, do you want to spray something and just leave it sit with the booth doors open? You're better off to use the cure mode and then just leave the doors shut. And then always just make sure that your painters are properly masking. If you've got a downdraft booth, air has to get out of the pit. And we see it all too often where people mask right down to the grates. And the paint booth isn't magic. It's bound by the laws of physics. And if you mask against the ground, the air cannot get out of the booth, and it's going to create an overspray problem inside the booth. And then really experiment with your cure times and temps to get the best results. Different booth controls allow you to do different things. We've got multi-set curing parameters, and you'd be surprised how much efficiency can be gained by using multi-set cure modes if you have the ability in your booth. So definitely something that you'd want to look into. And that's all I had for slides. So I don't know if there's any other questions or anything else we can help you all with today.
We'll open that back up. I have a question that came in on burner maintenance. Is there anything you should be doing there?
Burner maintenance, if you do a good job changing your filters, burner maintenance is going to be extremely limited. I would recommend having a professional booth service company look at your booth once a year. And when they do that, they should be looking at, if you've got a direct fired burner, I'll start with that. So a direct fired burner is going to look like a big trough that you can see the flame inside the burner box when it's running. That can be vacuumed out or it can be cleaned. If you do a good job with filters, it should be really low maintenance. Sometimes some corrosion can build up in there. And then also the pilot assembly, there's a couple different versions of that. The pilot assembly and basically the flame rod that's gonna sense that flame, those need to be cleaned maybe once a year, and that'll probably be the main part that goes out on a direct fired burner system would be that pilot assembly. So it's a wearable, replaceable item. If you want to be really aggressive, you could change that every 3 to 5 years, whether it's gone out or not. It's probably $300 part, something like that. If you've got an indirect fired burner, and that's going to have a heat exchanger, kind of like what a house furnace would have in it, the best way to know if you've got an indirect fired burner is go look at the air makeup unit. You're going to have two big stacks that are air coming in and air going out, and they're going to be call it 30 inches square around or bigger. If you've got one that's small, like around 10 inches in diameter, you've got an indirect fired burner. And in that case, you're going to want to have a company look at that burner once a year that's familiar with either booth maintenance. I mean, they've got good technical people, or you're going to want to have a local HVAC technician come look at that, because those indirect fired burners are really notorious for cracking. And in your house, what happens is you get CO2 in your house and your CO alarm goes off and you could die in your sleep or whatever. In a booth, we move air, you don't have a CO2 problem, but what you do have is a fire issue or fire hazard. I was actually, just before we got slowed down from traveling, I was in Salt Lake City where there was a booth fire, and it was all because they had an older booth with indirect heat exchanger, and that heat exchanger had a crack and it actually got overspray in it and had a small explosion and started the booth on fire.
Another problem, Brandon, when they have indirects, if you have an indirect system that's oil fired, and you have, fisheye, or you have some paint problems, you see, some of that showing up in your coating and you don't know why. That could be from a leaking heat exchanger, right? You got a couple cracks and it's making, the combustion elements are making it into the airstream. So that would be a really old school system. I don't know how many of those are still out there, but they exist. I mean, there's definitely some places where, diesel or oil fuel is the only thing that's available, or that's just, what you ended up, walking into an old body shop and purchasing that body shop. That's what they had. So if you have some nuisance problems like that, and you can't really point to it, but you have an indirect system and there's oil or fuel involved, that's something that we've answered that call on service too. We don't know what the heck's going on. We've got fisheye problems. We've got this type of problem. And sure enough, we show up there and they've got an ancient heat exchanger that's got pinholes and cracks all over it. And there's just soot or just, products of combustion making it into the booth.
Yeah, it's good to add that. And if you do have an indirect fired air makeup unit and the booth is in great shape, I can kind of run you an ROI of what it would cost you to upgrade essentially to a new air makeup unit that would be direct fired, because there's a substantial utility savings as well with that. That'd be the other thing to look at there is an indirect fired burner. Most of them are around 80% efficient at best. So 80% of the natural gas or propane or whatever you put through it, 80% of it gets used, 20% of it does not. A new direct fired system is going to be, upper 90s, almost, nothing's 100% efficient, but it's going to be upper 90s in efficiency. Looks like Billy Bird has a question. How would you clean the exhaust fan? In the picture that I had in the first part of the meeting, if you got an exhaust fan that looks like that, I'm not going to lie, it's going to suck. The best way to get in there is start with rigid scrapers and see what you can all get scraped off. If it happens to be, that was a tube axle fan that I showed you, which is going to be really common. Depending on what you have for a booth, if you've got a turbine style fan, that fan blade can actually just be taken out of there because there's nothing on one side of it to prevent you from doing that. In which case you can have it shot blasted, or you can use different degree stripping agents, paint strippers on it. But if it's in a tube axle fan, you're just going to have to get in there and scrape it off as best you can. I will say that once you start, you have to finish. So once you start scraping overspray off, you've got to finish the job. Otherwise, it'll be out of balance and you'll have more issues than you had when you started. Good question. Do fans need to be balanced periodically? You know what? Depending on the style of fan, a tube axle fan, like what we're talking about, where the fan blades are inside the ductwork, you're really never going to balance that type of fan, or I've never seen that anyways, where you take those blades out and balance them. In all honesty, that fan is fairly inexpensive. You would just buy it and put a new fan in versus balancing that. Now, if you've got a turbine style fan, or some of the more intricate, like reverse incline centrifuge style fans, those can be balanced. In my career, I haven't done a whole lot of that, but I know there's several booth service companies that will take the fan out. They'll sandblast them or shot blast them and then balance them and then put them back in. So I guess the right answer is, unless there was a problem, it shouldn't theoretically need to be balanced, but I could definitely see that there would be a benefit to having it balanced before you put it back in. And Guido, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, like the only time we've ever run into having to do that was, on a fan wheel that's not readily available, or a fan and motor combo where a good example is the old well-builts that are all over the Northeast over here. That's an old Thermomechanica. They had a very particular wheel, particular hub, particular motor shaft. Everything about that direct drive combo was such a pain in the ass to go find, where you had to take the materials you had there, rebuild motors. It was just one of those particular things where nothing was available anymore. If you have a booth that's of a major brand, once your fan's out of balance and you had a problem with balancing it, I think you probably have some more catastrophic things where, especially if it's direct drive, if the motor got cashed, you could probably go and get a new one bought and put in faster than you could go and recondition and rebalance anything. But yeah, you can rebalance them, but it's kind of a rarity. Like at that point, then you're kind of looking at a new fan motor combo, unless you're stuck and you've got a really old one that no one can really source for you.
Okay.
Well,
any other questions?
That's a good group of questions.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was awesome. I think it's the most active questions we've had. Congratulations.
Well, hey, that's good. It's always good to get questions. And I mean, when you've been doing something for a long time and you start talking about it, you feel like you're rambling. So it'd be no different than, some of these guys talking about estimating or something that they've been the expert at for a long time. Yeah. So,
well, it's for a lot of shops, the paint booth is one of the largest investment equipment-wise in the shop. It's also used every day. We have a lot of shops that buy nice spot welders for an OEM program, but it sits in the corner and never gets touched. The paint booth gets touched every day. So taking care of it is critical, because, I can have one welder go down and I'm okay. My paint booth goes down and the world ends that day. So
yeah, exactly. Right. It's one of those things you just can't go get another one.
Yeah.
So
I can't call my equipment vendor and say, hey, can you bring one by for me to demo for a while to get through? So, But if for those of you that are watching, and for some of you that have dialed in, Brandon has put his contact information on in the chat room. But if you have any questions and you want to email him, it is B Louder, so BLOWDER at goaccudraft.com. You can also reach him by phone at 712-363-8882. And then if you miss any of that, well, you can always get us here, and then we'll put you in touch with Brandon or Guido. Hey, Guido, I do want to say, dude, I did not know that after all these years of talking to you and being friends, I had no idea about your dad and y'all having a body shop and all that. I feel like I'm just a loser. I don't know how I didn't know that, but that's awesome history, man.
Yeah, I don't know if we've told anybody, but yeah, it's great. We're real proud of it, and he's a big hero to us, like always. So yeah, it's nice to sit in front of everybody and kind of tell everybody who we are, where we come from.
Yeah, I like buying stuff from body shop people, and I love it when body shop people, they really understand what we go through. It's not just a salesman that came over and wants to sell me something.
Right.
So. Yeah. That's cool, man. Y'all got to do a better job of telling that story because I didn't know. Jason, did you know? Look, Jason.
Nope.
Oh, okay. Jason's going to be like, yeah, everybody knew Kristen, just not you.
No idea.
I told Guido we got to start telling that story because, I mean, I don't want to put a percentage to it, but of the paint booths that are in North America, I mean, the Pippa family has been responsible for, I mean, a huge percentage of them. I mean, double-digit number. And I think it's a pretty cool story, and a lot of people just don't know that. So
yeah, I'm thinking documentary film group, two brothers joined in different ways. I mean, you're hearing the movie voice. No, it's a fantastic story, and so it's hard. I think if you've probably painted it all in a booth, then you're right. The Pippa family has touched your work in one way or another. That's cool. That's awesome. So I appreciate you guys for joining us today. The video will go to our YouTube, or the webinar will go to our YouTube channel for replay. So if there's something you want to go back and review, you'll definitely be able to catch it there, and then you'll be able to catch the downloads. So when Brandon sends us those documents, I'll have those in the description on the YouTube channel. You can click download and get all those maintenance documents and templates that you want to get. And then Jason, we're back here at 1 o'clock, right? Counting me great. You see that? Yeah.
Yes, we are.
We're back at 1 o'clock with Mickey. We'll be talking about relationship marketing as a tool to outmarket consolidators. So if you're wondering how do you beat the consolidators and the big guys, well, Mickey's going to be talking about that at 1 o'clock today with relationship marketing. So I appreciate it. Brandon and Guido, thank you so much. And we'll hopefully see everyone back at 1 o'clock. Thanks.
Hey, thanks so much. Thanks for the question, guys.